The FBI just revealed their strongest investigative lead in the Nancy Guthrie case. It's not DNA, it's not a fingerprint, it's a Bitcoin wallet. And what they found by tracking every transaction in that wallet could be what identifies whoever took an 84-year-old woman from her own home in the middle of the night. Before we examine exactly how cryptocurrency tracing works and why the person who created that Bitcoin address made a fatal mistake that the FBI is exploiting right now, I need to address something. Since Nancy disappeared on February 1st, the question I see most in comments is always the same. Was it the family? And I'm going to show you why former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer just listed 10 specific reasons. 10. Why law enforcement concluded the family had nothing to do with Nancy's disappearance. But first, you need to understand what the FBI discovered by following the money and why cryptocurrency is not anonymous the way most criminals believe it is. Before we dive into how the FBI is using blockchain forensics to track whoever created the Bitcoin wallet connected to Nancy's case, and why former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer systematically eliminated the family as suspects using 10 specific pieces of evidence, make sure you're subscribed to True Crime Vault and have notifications turned on. We bring you expert analysis on how federal investigations actually work. Not speculation, but verified methodology from people who conducted these investigations professionally. Hit that subscribe button right now. Smash the like button to support coverage that explains how cryptocurrency tracing technology is revolutionizing kidnapping investigations. Drop a comment telling us whether you think Bitcoin tracking will identify who took Nancy. Your engagement helps this reach people who might have critical information. And if you know anything about this case, contact FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or Pima County Sheriff at 520-351-4900. Over $1 million in reward money is waiting. Now let's examine exactly how the FBI tracks cryptocurrency and why the person behind that Bitcoin wallet already made mistakes that cannot be erased. A few days after Nancy vanished from her Tucson home in the early morning hours of February 1, 2026, the family received a ransom note. It wasn't a handwritten letter slipped under a door. It wasn't a phone call in the middle of the night with a distorted voice. It was a Bitcoin address, $6 million. That was the demand, sent directly to Savannah Guthrie and her siblings with a deadline. Monday at 5 p.m. Pay or never see your mother again. The deadline passed. The family didn't pay. Not because they didn't want to. Not because they didn't have access to resources. But because law enforcement protocol in kidnapping cases is explicit and non-negotiable. You do not transfer ransom funds without proof of life. Without confirmation that the victim is alive and that paying will result in their safe return. The family waited for that proof. It never came. And then something happened that nobody expected. A second note appeared. This time it wasn't sent to the family. It was sent directly to TMZ, the celebrity news outlet with massive reach and immediate publication capability. And the demand was different. 1 Bitcoin. About $70,000 at the time, in exchange for information about who kidnapped Nancy. Not ransom for Nancy herself. Information about who took her. Think about that for a second. Someone out there knows who did this, and they tried to make money off that information. Not the perpetrator demanding payment for Nancy's return. Someone claiming to have knowledge of who the perpetrator is and offering to sell that knowledge. This wasn't a ransom negotiation. This was someone attempting to profit from inside information about a federal crime. But here's where the story changes completely. Because the FBI wasn't sitting around waiting for tips or hoping someone would come forward. They've been tracking every single transaction, every cent that moved in or out of that wallet, since the moment that Bitcoin address was created. And that's exactly what Ari Redboard explained when he appeared on Nancy Grace's show to discuss the investigative capabilities law enforcement has when cryptocurrency is involved. Redboard is the global head of policy at TRM Labs, one of the largest cryptocurrency tracing companies in the world. Companies like TRM Labs work directly with federal law enforcement, including the FBI, providing tools and expertise that have revolutionized how financial crimes involving digital currency are investigated. And what Redboard said destroys the myth that most people, including many criminals, still believe about Bitcoin. He said, and I quote, "Every transaction occurs on a public blockchain, particularly Bitcoin. Every transaction is traceable, trackable, and immutable. There's no erasing it. Now most people hear Bitcoin and they think anonymous, untraceable, a way to move money without government surveillance or law enforcement tracking. That's what the person who took Nancy probably thought too. That's why they chose cryptocurrency instead of demanding cash or wire transfer or any traditional payment method. They believed Bitcoin would protect their identity, but that's not how it works. Not anymore, and arguably not ever. The blockchain, the public ledger on which all Bitcoin transactions are recorded, is exactly that. Public. Anyone can view it. Anyone can trace transactions from one address to another. The FBI doesn't need to hack anything. They don't need a warrant to access the blockchain. It's open, transparent, permanent. Every Bitcoin address is a unique string of letters and numbers. When someone sends money to that address or moves money from that address to another, the transaction is recorded on the blockchain with a timestamp, the amount transferred, the sending address, the receiving address, all visible to anyone who knows how to read the ledger. Forever. That transaction can never be deleted, never be altered, never be hidden. It exists permanently in the blockchain's history, and tools like the ones developed by TRM Labs do far more than just look at individual transactions. They map entire networks of addresses. They identify patterns of movement. They cross-reference wallet addresses against massive databases of known threat actors. Terrorists who use cryptocurrency to fund operations. Ransomware operators who demand Bitcoin from hacked corporations. Sanctioned individuals in countries under financial restrictions trying to move money internationally. Drug traffickers using crypto to launder proceeds. All of these actors leave traces in the blockchain. And companies like TRM Labs have spent years building databases that connect Bitcoin addresses to real-world identities when those addresses interact with regulated services. Here's how that works in practice. If whoever created that Bitcoin wallet in Nancy's case has ever bought Bitcoin on an exchange, a regulated platform like Coinbase or Kraken or Binance, that requires users to verify their identity with government ID and personal information, then there's a record connecting that person's real name to at least one Bitcoin address they control. If they ever moved cryptocurrency through a service that requires identification, even once, even years ago, that connection exists in a database somewhere. And if the wallet used in Nancy's case ever interacts with one of those identified addresses, even through multiple intermediate transactions, forensic analysis can trace the connection. The FBI, working with companies like TRM Labs, probably already knows who created that wallet, or they're getting closer every single day as more transactions occur and more connections are mapped. Here's the thing that most people miss about cryptocurrency investigations. You don't need to catch someone in the act. You don't need to surveil them making the transaction in real time. You just need them to make one mistake. One transaction that connects their supposedly anonymous wallet to their real identity. One cash out through an exchange that has their name on file. One transfer to a wallet that's already been flagged as belonging to a known criminal entity. One purchase using Bitcoin at a merchant that keeps records. That's all it takes. One mistake. One moment where the careful separation between anonymous address and real identity breaks down, and in this case, whoever is behind that wallet already made at least one critical mistake. They move money. On February 11th, just 10 days after Nancy's disappearance, AZ Family, a local Arizona news outlet, reported that new activity was detected in the wallet linked to the ransom note. Someone moved funds. Not a large amount necessarily, but movement. Transaction activity. Someone thought nobody was watching. Or maybe they thought Bitcoin's reputation for anonymity would protect them. But the FBI was watching. And every single movement, every transaction, every transfer from one address to another left a digital fingerprint that cannot be deleted, cannot be altered, cannot be hidden. The FBI is following that trail right now. As you're watching this video, federal investigators and blockchain forensic specialists are mapping where that money went, what addresses it touched, whether any of those addresses connect to identified individuals or services that can be subpoenaed for customer information. The technology exists to track cryptocurrency with precision that would have been impossible even 5 years ago. TRM Labs and similar companies have developed algorithms that can analyze millions of transactions per second, identifying patterns that indicate money laundering, tracing funds through multiple intermediate wallets designed to obscure the trail, connecting disparate addresses that appear unrelated but are actually controlled by the same entity. This is not guesswork. This is mathematical analysis of public data that produces actionable intelligence. And when that intelligence identifies a connection to a real person, The FBI has legal tools to pursue that lead. Subpoenas for exchange records, warrants for bank accounts if cryptocurrency was converted to traditional currency, surveillance of physical locations if addresses can be tied to specific individuals. All of it legal, all of it standard procedure in cases involving cryptocurrency and federal crimes. Let's talk about what makes blockchain forensics so powerful in criminal investigations. Traditional money laundering through banks and wire transfers leaves records, but those records are scattered across multiple institutions, multiple jurisdictions, multiple regulatory frameworks. Tracing money through the traditional financial system requires subpoenas to each institution, cooperation from international banks, navigation of privacy laws in different countries. It's possible, but slow and bureaucratic. Cryptocurrency is different. Every transaction ever made with Bitcoin exists on a single public ledger that anyone can access instantly without permission or legal process. The challenge isn't getting access to the data. The challenge is analyzing the enormous volume of data to identify patterns and connections that reveal real identities behind supposedly anonymous addresses. That's where companies like TRM Labs come in. They've built sophisticated software that can process millions of transactions, identify clusters of addresses controlled by the same entity based on transaction patterns and timing, flag addresses associated with known criminal activity, and map relationships between addresses across time. When law enforcement provides them with a Bitcoin address connected to a crime, they can trace backward to see where the Bitcoin in that address came from originally, trace forward to see where it goes when it's moved, and identify every address it touches along the way. Then they cross-reference those addresses against their databases to see if any connect to exchanges or services that have customer information. If they find a connection, law enforcement can subpoena that service for the identity of the account holder. In Nancy's case, the FBI knows the Bitcoin address that was sent to the family and to TMZ. They've been monitoring that address since the ransom notes were discovered. They saw the transaction on February 11th when funds moved. They know exactly which address those funds went to. They can see if that receiving address has any history, whether it's been used before, whether it connects to other addresses with known identities. They can set alerts to notify them instantly if any new transactions occur. And they can analyze the address that sent Bitcoin to the ransom wallet, tracing back to understand where the cryptocurrency came from originally. Every piece of that analysis happens without the person controlling the wallet knowing they're being watched. Because the blockchain is public, viewing transactions isn't an investigative action that requires notification. It's just reading public data. Subscribe to True Crime Vault and turn on all notifications for continued expert analysis of Nancy Guthrie's case as new developments emerge. Like this video to support investigative coverage that explains real forensic technology and methodology. Share this video because someone watching might have information about cryptocurrency activity connected to this case. Comment with your thoughts on whether blockchain forensics will identify the person responsible. And if you have any information about Nancy's disappearance, contact FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or Pima County Sheriff at 520-351-4900. Over $1 million in reward money is waiting for information that leads to Nancy's recovery or arrest of those responsible. Now here's the part I promised you at the beginning. The question that won't leave anyone's mind. Was it the family? Because every time someone disappears, especially in circumstances this suspicious, the first thing people do is look at whoever was closest. And in Nancy's case, that means looking at Annie, the daughter who lived with Nancy and cared for her daily. At Savannah, the famous daughter whose face is on national television every morning. At the son-in-law, at Cameron the son, at all of them. The internet exploded with theories, comment sections filled with speculation. Amateur sleuths analyzed body language in news interviews, looked for inconsistencies in statements, questioned why Savannah returned to work, questioned why the family wasn't more visible, questioned why they were too visible. Every action scrutinized, every word parsed for hidden meaning. Jennifer Coffindaffer is a former FBI special agent. She spent years working cases exactly like this one. Kidnappings, missing persons, families torn apart by violence. She knows what guilt looks like from decades of interviewing suspects who tried to hide their involvement, who constructed alibis, who performed grief to deflect suspicion. She knows what grief looks like from decades of supporting victims' families through the worst moments of their lives. And she knows the difference between someone who is hiding something and someone who is living through unimaginable trauma. She just listed 10 reasons why she believes the family had absolutely nothing to do with what happened to Nancy. 10 specific reasons based on investigative methodology, statistical analysis, behavioral assessment, and professional judgment. Not opinions from Reddit threads. Not theories from YouTube comment sections. This is trained analysis from someone who did this professionally for the United States government and who has no reason to defend the family if evidence suggested their involvement. Reason 1. Statistically, matricide, the killing of one's mother, accounts for less than 1% of all homicides in the United States. It's vanishingly rare, and abduction of a parent by adult children is even rarer, so uncommon that it barely registers in FBI crime statistics. When elderly parents are harmed by adult children, the circumstances follow predictable patterns. It happens in the context of caregiver stress where someone snaps under the pressure of providing daily care. It happens during immediate confrontation over money or living arrangements or medical decisions. It happens when financial desperation drives someone to accelerate inheritance. But it almost never involves elaborate staging with ransom notes and cryptocurrency and masked intruders captured on security cameras and weeks of reconnaissance. The profile doesn't fit. Coffindaffer knows this because she studied the statistics and worked the cases. Matricide looks different from what happened to Nancy. Reason 2. The family displays genuine grief. Coffindaffer said they're not acting. She analyzed their emotional responses in public appearances, in the videos they posted pleading for Nancy's return, in interviews with journalists. The pain is real. The trauma is evident. Savannah breaking down on Instagram describing waking up in the middle of the night imagining her mother's terror. Annie weeping at the memorial outside Nancy's home, unable to speak through sobs. Cameron speaking directly to whoever took their mother with raw emotion and desperation. These are not performances. These are people shattered by loss and desperate for answers. Coffindaffer, who has interviewed countless suspects who attempted to fake grief and who failed because genuine emotion cannot be manufactured convincingly over extended periods, sees none of the tells that indicate deception. She sees real trauma, real pain, real family members living through something no one should have to experience. When suspects fake grief, they make specific mistakes. They describe emotions rather than experiencing them. They watch for reactions from investigators to gauge whether their performance is working. They can maintain the facade during interviews, but drop it when they think no one is watching. They provide too much detail about their emotional state because they're constructing a narrative rather than living it. The Guthrie family shows none of these indicators. Their grief is consistent across contexts. It's raw and unpolished. It includes anger and confusion and guilt and desperation. The complex, messy reality of trauma rather than the simplified version someone faking it would perform. Coffindaffer recognizes real grief when she sees it. And she sees it in the Guthrie family. Reason 3. Nancy was 84 years old and in declining health. She had back pain severe enough that walking to her mailbox was difficult. She had a documented heart condition requiring daily medication and pacemaker monitoring. She was, by any objective measure, elderly and frail. If someone in the family wanted to harm her, they wouldn't need to stage an elaborate kidnapping with ransom notes and Bitcoin addresses and masked intruders captured on security cameras. They would simply wait. Elderly people with serious health conditions die of natural causes regularly. Heart attacks, strokes, complications from falls, infections that their weakened immune systems cannot fight. Any of these could happen naturally to an 84-year-old woman with Nancy's health profile. If financial motive existed, patience would be the logical strategy, not high-risk felony abduction that carries potential life imprisonment. The complexity of what happened makes no sense if a family member was responsible. Why create an elaborate crime with enormous risk when natural causes would accomplish the same result with zero legal jeopardy? Reason 4. The financial motive is weak to non-existent when you actually examine the numbers. Nancy's home in the Catalina foothills is worth approximately $1 million based on comparable sales in the area. That's her primary asset. $1 million sounds like a lot of money, and for most people it is. But split 3 ways among her children, that's a little over $300,000 each, before taxes and estate settlement costs. Nobody architects a crime this complex, this risky, with this much potential for life imprisonment for $300,000, especially when at least one of those children, Savannah, earns millions of dollars annually as one of the highest paid anchors in American television. Her Today Show contract alone is worth more annually than Nancy's entire estate. The risk-reward calculation doesn't support financial motive. $300,000 isn't life-changing money for someone who already earns in the millions. It's not worth risking everything. And there's another financial consideration that eliminates the family from suspicion. If this were about inheritance, the logical approach would be to maintain the appearance of natural death or accident, file police reports after the fact, express shock and grief, allow the estate to settle naturally through probate. Creating a high-profile kidnapping with ransom demands and federal investigation ensures maximum scrutiny of the family's finances, relationships, and potential motives. It's the opposite of what someone motivated by financial gain would do. Financial criminals want to avoid attention, avoid investigation, allow events to be processed as tragic but unsuspicious. The Guthrie family did the opposite. They amplified attention. They went on national television. They posted videos seen by millions. They created a media firestorm that brought FBI resources and public scrutiny. That's not the behavior of people trying to get away with murder for inheritance. Reason 5. The operational plan is far too elaborate for a family member. Ransom notes sent to multiple parties. Bitcoin wallet creation requiring technical knowledge of cryptocurrency. Security cameras systematically disabled requiring understanding of which cameras existed and how to defeat them. Wi-Fi network disrupted requiring technical capability to interfere with wireless communications. A masked figure approaching the house at precisely planned time captured on doorbell camera. These are not actions a family member would take when they have daily unrestricted access to the victim. If Annie or her husband, who lived with Nancy and cared for her every day, wanted to harm her, they didn't need to break into their own home wearing a mask at 2 in the morning. They had keys. They had access. They had opportunity every single day. They could have created any scenario they wanted during normal daytime hours when their presence would be completely unsuspicious. The elaborate staging only makes sense if perpetrators needed to create those opportunities because they didn't have them naturally. Someone who doesn't have keys needs to figure out how to get in. Someone who doesn't have regular access needs to scout the property to learn the layout. Someone who would be questioned if seen at the house needs a mask and darkness to conceal identity. Family members don't have any of those constraints. They're expected to be at the house. They're expected to have access. They're expected to know the layout and routines. The complexity of what happened is the behavior of outsiders who needed to overcome barriers that family members don't face. Reason 6 directly addresses Annie specifically since she had the most access. Annie and her husband were Nancy's daily caregivers. They lived with her or near her, depending on which reports are accurate about the exact living arrangement. But regardless, they had direct access every single day. They managed her medications. They helped with her mobility issues. They drove her to appointments. They were present in her home regularly without anyone questioning their presence. If they wanted to do something, the operational complexity of what actually happened makes no sense. They didn't need reconnaissance visits in January to learn the layout. They lived there or spent hours there daily. They didn't need to scout camera positions. They installed some of those cameras or lived with them for years. They didn't need to figure out when Nancy would be alone. They knew her schedule better than anyone. The behavior captured on security cameras, someone studying the property from outside over multiple visits, someone approaching cautiously in the middle of the night, someone who needed to learn information that residents would already know, is the behavior of an outsider. Reason 7 focuses on Savannah specifically, since her public profile makes her the subject of enormous speculation. Savannah didn't need the money. She's one of the highest paid personalities in American television news, earning millions annually from her Today Show contract alone, not counting other appearances, speaking engagements, book deals, and endorsements. Her net worth is estimated in the tens of millions of dollars. Nancy's estate, even if Savannah inherited the entire thing, which she wouldn't, represents a fraction of Savannah's existing wealth. There's no financial pressure, no debt, no circumstance that would make Nancy's estate significant to Savannah's financial situation. And Nancy wasn't a liability to Savannah's career. Nancy appeared on the Today Show multiple times. She was charming, relatable, someone who humanized Savannah to viewers. Nancy's presence in Savannah's life was beneficial, not burdensome. Viewers loved seeing Savannah interact with her mother. It created warm moments that enhanced Savannah's appeal. There's no rational motive for Savannah to be involved. None. Reason 8 addresses the timeline, which is particularly damaging to any theory involving Savannah. The disappearance happened on February 1st, early morning hours, while Savannah was on assignment covering events, visible and accounted for, with witnesses and documentation of her whereabouts. She was working. She was on camera or with colleagues. She had alibis that would be nearly impossible to fabricate given her public profile and the number of people who would have been around her. If she were planning something, why choose the moment when she's most visible, most tracked, furthest from Tucson, with the most potential witnesses to her location? The timing would be inexplicable if she had any involvement. If you're planning a crime, you don't execute it when you have an ironclad alibi that also makes you obviously absent from the scene. You'd wait for a time when you could be present to control variables and ensure the plan works. The timing of Nancy's disappearance, during a period when Savannah was verifiably elsewhere, is exculpatory, not suspicious. Reason 9 is perhaps the most definitive from a legal and investigative standpoint. Law enforcement officially cleared the family. Both the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Office confirmed publicly that no family member is a person of interest in the investigation. This isn't vague language that leaves room for interpretation. This isn't investigators saying we're looking at all possibilities, which is standard non-committal language during active investigations. This is explicit clearance. Federal investigators and local detectives who have access to all the evidence, all the witness statements, all the forensic analysis, all the communications, all the financial records, all the information the public doesn't see, concluded definitively that the family is not involved. That conclusion didn't happen casually. That happened after thorough investigation, after alibis were verified and documented, after financial records were examined for unusual transactions or money movements, after communications were analyzed for suspicious contacts or deleted messages, after polygraph examinations if the family agreed to them, after forensic examination of vehicles and possessions if consent was given. The family was cleared because evidence cleared them. Law enforcement doesn't publicly eliminate suspects without cause. They eliminated the family because investigation revealed nothing connecting them to the crime and everything pointing away from them. And reason 10 is perhaps the most revealing from a purely behavioral and operational standpoint. Security cameras and forensic analysis show that someone made multiple reconnaissance visits to Nancy's home in January before the abduction on February 1st. The masked figure captured on doorbell camera on the night of the abduction had been there before. Law enforcement sources confirmed to multiple news outlets that the same person or someone working with them had approached the property weeks earlier, studied the camera angles to understand what was visible and what wasn't, assessed entry points to identify vulnerabilities, observed patterns to determine when Nancy was typically alone and when the house had visitors. 3 times based on what investigators have indicated to journalists covering the case. 3 separate reconnaissance visits over multiple weekends in January. Someone who grew up in that house doesn't need to scout the property. Annie lived there, or spent enormous amounts of time there caring for Nancy. She knows where every camera is positioned because she sees them daily and probably helped set some of them up. She knows the layout intimately, every room, every door, every window. She knows when Nancy is typically alone because she's part of Nancy's daily routine. There's no need for reconnaissance. That's the behavior of an outsider. Someone who needed to learn what family would already know instinctively from years of living there or visiting regularly. So if it wasn't the family, and every piece of investigative evidence and professional analysis indicates it wasn't, who was it? That's what makes this case so disturbing. Because the clues don't point to a complete stranger who picked a random house while driving through an unfamiliar neighborhood looking for a target of opportunity. They point to someone who knew the property well enough to navigate it in darkness. Someone who knew where the cameras were positioned and how to defeat them. Someone who knew how to disable the Wi-Fi network that connected them to Nancy's phone and to cloud storage, requiring either technical knowledge or research specific to her setup. Someone who knew that Nancy would be alone that particular night, not at her daughter's house, not hosting visitors, but home and vulnerable. Someone who knew the layout of the house well enough to get in and get out in the 41-minute window between camera disconnect at 1:47 a.m. and pacemaker signal loss at 2:28 a.m. without triggering any alarms beyond the ones they deliberately disabled. That level of knowledge points to someone local, someone who had been in or around that house before, not as a criminal but in some legitimate capacity that gave them access and information. Contractor, service provider, delivery person, neighbor, someone who moved through that property or that neighborhood regularly enough to learn details without arousing suspicion. And here's the part that keeps investigators focused on local suspects. Neighbor Aldine Meister told investigators she saw a strange man walking through the neighborhood about 2 weeks before the disappearance, which would place that sighting in mid-January, consistent with the reconnaissance timeline investigators have established. She described him carefully to law enforcement. She said he just didn't fit the normal pattern of the neighborhood. He wasn't a jogger in athletic clothes running a regular route that residents would recognize. He wasn't walking a dog the way people do in the evening in residential areas. He wasn't a delivery person or service worker with visible purpose and identifying uniform. He was just there, moving through the area slowly, deliberately, like he was studying it, observing houses, noting details, looking at cameras, watching for patterns of when people came and went. And when Meister was asked by investigators how many people she thought were involved in Nancy's abduction based on what she saw and what she knew about the case, she didn't say one. She said 2 or 3. Multiple kidnappers, coordinated, prepared, working together with divided roles, one person scouting, one person executing, maybe a third person driving or providing support. That assessment aligns with what other experts, including retired Pima County homicide detective Kurt Dobbs, have said. Dobbs told Parade he believes the operation required 2 to 4 people based on the logistics and coordination evident in how the crime was executed. One person wearing a mask approaching the front door. Another person possibly already inside the house based on the security gate that neighbors say was nearly impossible to open from outside. Someone driving the vehicle that would transport Nancy. The sophistication suggests planning and teamwork, not a lone actor improvising. A doorbell camera captured the suspect on the night of February 1st. Masked, face completely covered with what appears to be a ski mask or similar fabric designed to conceal identity. Wearing dark clothing designed to minimize visibility at night, making him harder to spot from neighboring houses or by passing vehicles. Carrying a full backpack worn on his back, clearly visible in the footage. That backpack has generated enormous speculation and investigative focus. Was the backpack full when he arrived, carrying tools for the job, equipment needed to disable cameras and Wi-Fi, restraints or zip ties, duct tape, whatever was needed to execute the abduction? Or was it full when he left, carrying something he took from inside the house, either valuables stolen as part of the crime or something else? The FBI knows the answer to that question based on footage showing the suspect's posture and gait when approaching versus leaving, and based on forensic analysis of what was or wasn't disturbed inside Nancy's home. The public doesn't know yet, but that backpack represents either preparation or theft, and either interpretation adds dimensions to understanding motive. But the FBI knows one thing with absolute certainty. Whoever created that Bitcoin wallet made a mistake, because every transaction is traceable. Every cent moved is visible on the public blockchain that anyone can access. Every connection between addresses can be mapped using the sophisticated forensic tools that companies like TRM Labs have developed specifically for law enforcement. Every interaction with a regulated service creates a potential link to real identity, and the walls are closing in. The question that stays with investigators and with everyone following this case closely is this: if the FBI can track every movement in that wallet, if they know someone moved money just 10 days after the kidnapping, if they have tools that cross-reference addresses with known criminals worldwide, if blockchain forensics can map networks with precision, if they potentially already know who created the wallet based on connections to identified addresses, why haven't they arrested anyone yet? What exactly are they waiting for? Several possibilities exist, and all of them are consistent with standard federal investigative practice. First, they might be building a complete case with overwhelming evidence before making an arrest. Federal prosecutors are notoriously cautious about bringing charges before they're certain of conviction. Making an arrest before you have sufficient evidence to convict means you show your hand, alert co-conspirators, and risk an acquittal that prevents retrying due to double jeopardy protections. Better to wait until the evidence is overwhelming and airtight than rush to arrest and potentially lose the case in court. The FBI would rather take months building an unbeatable case than move quickly and risk letting guilty people walk free because the evidence wasn't quite sufficient at the time of arrest. Second, they might be using the Bitcoin trail to identify not just one person, but everyone involved in a coordinated operation. If this was a multi-person crime with 2 to 4 participants, as multiple experts believe, arresting one person prematurely might allow others to flee or destroy evidence. The person who created the Bitcoin wallet might not be the person who actually took Nancy. They might be the tech-savvy accomplice while someone else did the physical abduction. If the FBI arrests the wallet creator but that person doesn't know where Nancy is or who physically took her, the investigation loses momentum and other participants scatter. Better to identify all participants before moving so that arrests can be coordinated and everyone involved is taken into custody simultaneously. Third, they might be waiting for the suspect to make another mistake that provides additional evidence or confirms identity. Every transaction in that wallet is another potential link. Every attempt to cash out or move funds through services creates another opportunity to identify the person controlling the address or to gather more evidence that supports prosecution. Patience in investigations often produces better results than rushing to arrest. The suspect doesn't know they're being watched. They might make additional moves that provide even more evidence or connect them to other crimes or identify accomplices. As long as they're not aware of surveillance, they're likely to continue creating evidence trails. Fourth, there's a possibility the FBI knows exactly who did this and is building not just a kidnapping case, but potentially a homicide case. The pacemaker that went silent at 2:28 a.m. on February 1st and never reconnected. The lack of any proof of life in over 60 days despite the family's desperate public pleas. The consensus among 8 named law enforcement experts, including former FBI agents and homicide detectives, that this was a targeted abduction gone wrong. All of that points to the possibility that Nancy didn't survive the initial confrontation or the immediate aftermath. If investigators believe Nancy is deceased based on medical evidence about her pacemaker, based on the absence of proof of life, based on analysis of the blood evidence found at the scene, then they're not just building a kidnapping case. They're building a murder case. And murder cases require more evidence, more certainty, more preparation before charges are filed because the stakes are higher and the burden of proof is greater. The cryptocurrency angle gives investigators unique advantages that don't exist with traditional cash ransom demands. Unlike cash, which can be destroyed or spent without trace once it leaves the bank, Bitcoin creates a permanent record of every movement. Every transaction adds information to the investigative file. Every new address the Bitcoin touches potentially identifies new suspects or accomplices. Every attempt to convert cryptocurrency to traditional currency through an exchange creates a subpoena opportunity where law enforcement can demand customer identification from the exchange. The longer the investigation continues without the suspect successfully cashing out, the more data accumulates. The more connections are mapped, the more the net tightens around everyone involved. The person behind that Bitcoin wallet might believe they got away with it because no arrest has been made after 60+ days. But every day that passes without them successfully converting that Bitcoin to usable currency, every transaction they make trying to move or hide or launder the funds, every connection to other addresses that might be identified or flagged, adds to the evidence file the FBI is building. The blockchain doesn't forget. The ledger doesn't reset. Every mistake is permanent. And the person who created that wallet already made at least one mistake by moving funds on February 11th. They might make more. And each one brings investigators closer to identification and arrest. Here's what we know for certain based on verified reporting from credible sources. Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona, in the early morning hours of February 1st, 2026. Motion was detected inside her house at 2:12 a.m. Her pacemaker disconnected from her phone at 2:28 a.m., indicating she was moved beyond Bluetooth range, or that her heart stopped. Someone created a Bitcoin wallet and sent ransom demands to her family and to media outlets in the days following her disappearance. The initial demand was $6 million sent to the family with a deadline that passed without payment. A second demand for 1 Bitcoin was sent to TMZ offering to sell information about who kidnapped Nancy. Someone moved money in that wallet on February 11th, just 10 days after the disappearance. The FBI has been tracking every transaction since day one using blockchain forensics tools provided by companies like TRM Labs that specialize in cryptocurrency tracing. The family has been officially cleared by federal and local law enforcement after thorough investigation that examined alibis, financial records, communications, and potential motives. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer listed 10 specific reasons why the family is not involved, ranging from statistical rarity of matricide to the elaborate nature of the operation to official law enforcement clearance. Someone conducted reconnaissance at Nancy's property multiple times in January before the abduction, studying cameras and layout and patterns. A neighbor saw a suspicious person in the area in mid-January consistent with that reconnaissance timeline, and no proof of life has been provided despite the family's desperate public pleas and stated willingness to pay whatever was demanded. What we don't know yet is who. But the Bitcoin wallet, that digital trail of transactions that cannot be erased or hidden, that exists permanently on a public blockchain accessible to law enforcement and forensic specialists, might be what finally provides the answer. Because cryptocurrency investigations have solved cases that seemed impossible. Cases where suspects believed Bitcoin would protect their identity. Cases where criminals thought they could collect ransoms or move illicit funds without being traced. They were wrong. The technology exists to track cryptocurrency with precision. The expertise exists within federal law enforcement and private companies that work with them. And both are being applied right now to trace whoever created the wallet in Nancy's case back to their real identity. The operators of the Silk Road dark web marketplace, a massive criminal enterprise that facilitated drug sales and other illegal transactions using Bitcoin, believed cryptocurrency would protect them from law enforcement. It didn't. Ross Ulbricht, the founder, is serving life in prison without parole. The FBI traced Bitcoin transactions, identified patterns, connected wallets to real identities, and built an overwhelming case that led to conviction. The Colonial Pipeline ransomware attackers who shut down a major fuel pipeline and demanded millions in Bitcoin believed cryptocurrency would let them collect their ransom anonymously and disappear. It didn't. The FBI recovered most of the Bitcoin within weeks by tracing wallet addresses, identifying the criminals, and seizing the funds. The technology works, the methodology is proven, and it's being used right now in Nancy's case. If you've been following Nancy Guthrie's case and want to stay ahead of developments as the investigation continues, make sure you're subscribed to True Crime Vault with notifications turned on, because this is an active case that's moving toward resolution. Like this video to support coverage that explains real investigative techniques and forensic technology rather than speculation and theories. Share this video because someone watching might have information about suspicious cryptocurrency activity in February, about someone who suddenly seemed to have Bitcoin or who was researching how to use cryptocurrency, about someone in the Tucson area whose behavior changed around February 1st. Comment with your thoughts on whether Bitcoin tracking will crack this case and lead to arrest. And if you have any information, any detail, no matter how small it seems, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. That number is 1-800-225-5324. Or contact Pima County Sheriff at 520-351-4900. The reward is over $1 million waiting for information that leads to Nancy's recovery or to arrest of those responsible. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She had dinner with her family on a Saturday evening. She came home to her house where she'd lived for years. She went to bed in her own home believing she was safe in a quiet residential neighborhood. She deserved to wake up the next morning. She deserved to continue living her life surrounded by the family who loved her. She deserves justice. And whoever took her, whoever created that Bitcoin wallet thinking cryptocurrency would protect their identity and allow them to profit from kidnapping an elderly woman, made a fatal mistake. Because the blockchain never forgets. Every transaction is permanent. Every movement creates evidence. And the FBI is following the money, tracing every connection, mapping every address, building a case that will eventually lead straight to whoever did this. The walls are closing in. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when.